Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, May 30th, 2023. The debt ceiling and budget bill agreement finalized this weekend by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and President Joe Biden takes its first legislative step, going before the House Rules Committee. But at least two of the Republican majority members on that committee are vehemently opposed, saying the agreement does not cut spending enough and promising to try to kill it if they can. They're part of a larger group of House Republicans who oppose the bill. Another group of progressive House Democrats will also be voting no because it cuts spending too much. The question is, will there be enough in the middle, Republicans and Democrats, to make a majority to have it pass the House? And will the same happen in the Senate? To prevent the economic shock of the U.S. unable to take on more debt to pay its bills, Treasury Department estimates that could happen by Monday, June 5th. We'll have all the latest in just a moment. Also today, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy threatening to hold FBI Director Christopher Wray in contempt of Congress if the director does not turn over a subpoenaed document from an informant that allegedly accuses President Biden of being part of a bribery scheme when he was vice president. And the current Vice President Kamala Harris gives the commencement address to cadets at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. From NBC News, the bipartisan debt ceiling deal signed off by President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy over the weekend is set to face its first big test as some GOP hardliners snipe at the bill ahead of the House Rules Committee's vote Tuesday afternoon. The committee will consider the 99-page Fiscal Responsibility Act. If approved for consideration on the floor, the full House is expected to vote on the bill Wednesday. Two of the 9 Republicans on the committee, which is divided 9-4 between Republicans and Democrats, are conservative hardliners who have aired their criticism of the deal. Those members could try to kill the bill during the panel's vote. If 3 Republicans and all Democrats vote no, it would fail. But even if some Republicans defect, Democrats could rescue it. That reporting from NBC News. The 2 members on the Rules Committee being talked about are members of the House Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus held a news conference this afternoon. Here's Congressman Norman.
The 2 factions that are supporting this bill, China, because they're just buying more debt to control America, and the Biden administration, which, as the hearings are showing, is corrupt and compromised to China. And we want to add the credit cards to give him to spend our money, and as has been said, unlimited debt ceiling and extend it through January of 2025. That's insanity. Who would do that? And I'm tired of hearing, as Andy says, we'll do it tomorrow. I'm tired of hearing, well, the Senate's not going to pass it. I'm tired of that. I'm not in the Senate. Yep. The House, the reason the Democrats got kicked out in January is because they wanted a change. They wanted a conservative change. This bill does nothing to that. If nothing else, if you examine the bill, the existing debt that we've got is $32 trillion and counting. To give you a concept, $1 trillion at 3% is $30 billion. $1 trillion. The interest on the debt is going to exceed our military budget if we keep going the way we're going. Somewhere, somebody has got to stop it. This group behind me is willing to do that. I'm on Rules Committee. It's a great committee. We know everything coming through. But folks, if we can stop it there, I will stop it. There is a reason why 100 Democrats, none of which voted for our initial bill, is now for it. Why is that? It's because they got what they wanted. And Kevin McCarthy had done a good job speaking the language. His number 1 slogan is national debt is the biggest threat we have to America. That's out of his words. And then to pass this bill, folks, it's time to go back to the drawing table. It's time for us to say no. And look, I don't buy Janet Yellen's "the sky's falling." She's moved the X date 3 times. June 1st, now it's June 5th, and I hear it's June 8th. What gives? Tax revenues are going to be coming in. We're not going to default. We're going to choose. They're going to say this. Let's call their bluff on it. The best deal is no deal. The time you get up and walk away from the table was when Biden spent 97 days dithering in Japan and God knows where else he went. And now all of a sudden, at the last minute, it's an insult to get a 100-page bill and be asked to decide on it on the spot.
Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican, at a House Freedom Caucus news conference on the U.S. Capitol grounds just a few hours before the Rules Committee started meeting on this debt ceiling and budget bill. Associated Press with a summary of what's in it. It suspends the debt limit until January 2025, keeps non-defense spending flat in fiscal year 2024, and aims to limit federal budget growth to 1% for the next 6 years. But the AP article notes that provision would not be enforceable starting in 2025. It rescinds $30 billion of unspent coronavirus relief money, rescinds $1.4 billion in IRS funding, fully funds medical care for veterans in President Biden's proposed fiscal year 2024 budget, expands work requirements for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. But again, this from AP, the changes are pared down from the House-passed debt ceiling bill. There's permitting reform to speed up energy projects, and it ends the pause on federal student loan repayment this August. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy defended the agreement this morning on the Fox News Channel.
We're actually going to spend less money this year than we spent last year. And your viewers have heard me give this analogy before. A debt limit is like the family having a credit card, but you've been charging it up every year and just keep lifting the limit. This year's different. We now say we're going to spend less. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to look at all what we spend our money on because the mandatory spending, Social Security, Medicare, that's all off to the side. So I can only look at about 15% of what we spend our money on. So what we did is, in elements like non-defense, that's going to go below 2022 levels. So that's a very positive. But the other thing we did, we put ourselves on a spending plan. We cap how much we can spend for the next 6 years with government. But we also did something different. In this family, we may have a child that able-bodied, not married, no kids, but he's sitting on the couch collecting welfare. We're going to put work requirements on that individual, so he's going to have work requirements, he's going to get a job, and it's going to make the life easier. But we're also going to look at places we've been spending our money that we've wasted that we're going to return, right? Like all that COVID money that we didn't spend, we're going to bring it back. But one of my favorites here is $400 million for CDC, the Global Fund, where we'd use that hardworking taxpayer money over to China. We're not going to do that. We're going to send that back. And then we did a number of other things here, right? One of the things that's very interesting we did, that the president has been spending money wildly. If he wants to put a new regulation in, we took an executive order of President Trump's, and now we're putting it into law and making it a little tougher, where if he wants to put a new regulation in, he has to cut government if it costs more than $100 million. And then we looked at things about cutting the red tape, that we get so frustrated that we can't build the roads. It takes 7 years. We now reform NEPA, the environmental review. Instead of waiting 7 years, now the studies are only 1 to 2 years. This hasn't been done in 40 years. And then we did something interesting to make government, or make Congress, consequences for their lack of action. They have 12 appropriation bills that they have to pass every year, and they never do, and they come back with that omnibus. Now we say, if you don't do your job, it's a 1% cut across the board. So encourage members of Congress, not now with the new Congress you actually show up, now you're going to have to work. This is going to be the biggest cut by the Congressional Budget Office says in history of where we're going forward. To do all that, we allowed the debt ceiling to go forward for the next 18 months, and we'll readdress it, hopefully with a Republican president and a Republican Senate, to even make it stronger.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy this morning on Fox News. Concerning today's House Rules Committee meeting, the committee, by a majority vote, can send legislation to the House floor with specific rules of debate, including how much time there'll be and whether amendments can be offered. Rules Committee has 13 members, 9 in the majority, 4 in the minority, as mentioned earlier, and 2 Republicans on the committee have come out against the debt ceiling and budget bill. Washington Post reports about another Republican. But so far, Congressman Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, a libertarian-minded conservative who sometimes sides with the Freedom Caucus, seems to support the deal. His vote would give Republicans enough support to adopt the rule, since the 4 Democrats in the committee aren't expected to offer their support on this procedural step. If it gets out of the Rules Committee and heads to the House floor, that debate and final passage vote expected on Wednesday. The House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York speaking to reporters this afternoon.
Afternoon, everybody. Let me first just again express my appreciation to President Biden for arriving at a resolution that does 3 important things. First, President Biden has avoided a catastrophic default, which would crash the economy and hurt millions of everyday Americans. Second, President Biden has arrived at a resolution that would suspend the debt ceiling for at least 2 years and avoid a hostage-taking situation for the balance of the 118th Congress. Third, President Biden has arrived at a resolution that protects incredibly important democratic interests. The resolution reached by President Biden protects Social Security, protects Medicare, protects Medicaid, protects veterans, protects the clean energy tax credits, protects the American people from the type of draconian cuts that were included in the extreme MAGA Republican Default on America Act, and it protects vulnerable communities like the homeless and like individuals who are aging out of foster care. I'm thankful for President Biden's leadership and confident that we will avoid a catastrophic default.
Mr. Leader, Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal says she's currently whipping votes. What is your message to progressives who are concerned about this deal?
My message is exactly what I just communicated, but we will continue to have a family conversation throughout the day, later on this evening and tomorrow in terms of the caucus. What we all are interested in is how many votes are the Republicans who negotiated this resolution going to produce. Initially, we heard that 95% of the House Republican Conference supports the agreement. That doesn't appear to be the case. But what we also are committed to making sure occurs is that the House Republicans keep their promise to produce at least 150 votes, period, full stop.
Has the Speaker asked you for a number?
Speaker has not asked me for a number.
Are you committed to ensuring this passes if they are unable to present that volume of votes, that many votes?
It's my expectation that House Republicans will keep their commitment to produce at least 2/3 of their conference, which is approximately 150 votes. Democrats are committed to making sure that we do our part and avoid a default.
The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, with reporters this afternoon. Congressional Progressive Caucus, which says it has 101 House members, all Democrats, says it is polling its members to see if they support this bill. The chair, Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, said on CNN on Sunday that Democratic leadership should be concerned about whether that group will lend its votes. Today, she held a virtual news conference saying the members of her caucus who are opposed are doing so for the right reasons, unlike, she says, her counterparts on the right.
I want to be very clear about one thing, because I've seen a lot of articles that sort of say the extreme left didn't get what they want and the extreme right didn't get what they want. And this is, a deal with just, centrist members. I just want to categorically reject the comparison between the extreme left and extreme right, where CPC members are voting no. If we do that, it's because the bill will increase the number of hungry people in this country. It will be because it allows continued tax cheating by the wealthy and corporations on the backs of poor people. It will be because we are implementing what could be environmentally disastrous permitting policies that actually oppose the very fundamental notion of the urgency of taking on climate change. The CPC is a caucus of yes, and always has been, and always has worked alongside our Democratic colleagues and our president to deliver what I believe to have been one of the most effective and impactful sessions in history in the last 2 years, the best and most just policy that we can for the people.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair, on a virtual news conference today. Congresswoman Annie Kuster, Democrat from New Hampshire, chairs the new Democrat coalition, which says it has nearly 100 members. She told MSNBC this morning that she'll vote yes on this debt ceiling and budget bill.
I'm the chair of the new Democrat coalition. We're almost 100 center-left Democrats, and we are working hard, talking to our colleagues now, but seeing a lot of support. I think you characterized it exactly right. It's not perfect, and everybody's got something in there that they want to dive into a little bit deeper. They've got some issues with. But look, at the end of the day, you've got to step up and do the right thing. You know, you can either be part of the solution or part of the problem, and our members are choosing to be part of the solution.
So, Congresswoman, what do you say to some of the more progressive members of your own caucus, the Democrats who say the president gave away too much here, we shouldn't have work requirements, kind of ticking down the list? What do you tell them to earn their votes here?
Well, one thing that hasn't been talked about very much is this was a budget negotiation that now means we won't have a government shutdown in September. And I've been through 3 or 4 government shutdowns in the decade that I've been here, and that is extremely disruptive to real people's real lives. And so we should put that on the chalkboard as things that we got. We protected Social Security, we protected Medicare, we protected Medicaid, and we want to make sure that we do bring those deficits down. I come from a part of the country where every tax dollar should be spent wisely or not spent at all. And let's make sure that we are taking care of business, helping the most vulnerable amongst us, protecting our homeland and our security, protecting our veterans. That was a big goal for us, and we did get some changes in the negotiation at the end on that I'm proud of, and I want to make sure that this gets to the finish line. So I'll be encouraging them to step up and do the right thing.
Congresswoman Annie Kuster, Democrat from New Hampshire, chair of the new Democrat coalition. President Biden putting out a statement in support of this agreement, writing, "The Congress has a solemn obligation to prevent default and ensure that the United States meets its financial obligations. The administration strongly supports H.R. 3746, the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023, which reflects a bipartisan compromise to avoid a first-ever default and protect our nation's hard-earned and historic economic recovery." One of the negotiators for the White House on this deal, Shalanda Young, director of the Office of Management and Budget, briefed reporters today.
The president and the speaker, Speaker McCarthy, reached a reasonable bipartisan agreement over the weekend. As someone who had the pleasure of negotiating this as a part of a great team, I can assure you that this was no easy task to get here. But what was on the line for the American people was real. I know I breathed a little easier. I called my parents, told them to breathe a little easier, that a deal had been reached, and that's what this was all about. It's an agreement that not only prevents the first ever default in this country, but it will protect our hard-earned and historic economic recovery. It will protect our legislative achievements, including the legislation that is creating good jobs in this country. And it's protecting critical programs that millions of Americans count on, that you've heard me repeatedly talk about. I want to be clear, this agreement represents a compromise, which means no one gets everything that they want, and hard choices had to be made. Negotiations require give and take. That's the responsibility of governing. For months, the president made clear, and you may have heard me say this once or twice, that Congress must take action to prevent default. And from the beginning, he said he would negotiate Republican leadership on a budget framework, and that will allow the appropriations process to proceed under regular order, just like we do every year. The bipartisan budget agreement that we've reached protects key legislative accomplishments from the past 2 years, including the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, the PACT Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act's Clean Energy Corporate Minimum Tax and prescription drug provisions. It protects programs millions of hardworking families count on. It protects Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, safeguarding health insurance for millions of Americans. It fully funds veterans' medical care, including mandatory funding for the PACT Act's Toxic Exposure Fund at the levels the president proposed in his fiscal year 24 budget. And it protects critical public health funding from being clawed back to prepare for future pandemics and possible COVID-19 surges. This agreement is now with the United States House and then on to the Senate. and we strongly urge both chambers to pass the bill and send it to the president's desk.
OMB Director Shalanda Young in the White House briefing room. If the debt ceiling and budget bill is approved by the Rules Committee tonight and then passes the House on Wednesday, it heads to the Senate with just a few days before the Treasury Department's Monday deadline for when the U.S. could default on the debt if the debt ceiling is not raised or suspended. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying today on the Senate floor he would bring this bill up as soon as possible.
3 days ago, President Biden and Speaker McCarthy announced a bipartisan budget agreement that will protect the U.S. economy while eliminating the threat of a catastrophic default. I support the bipartisan agreement that President Biden has produced with Speaker McCarthy. Avoiding default is an absolute imperative. The damage that default would inflict on our country, our economy, our families would be enormous and take years from which to recover. Of course, nobody is getting everything they want. There's give on both sides. But this agreement is the responsible, prudent, and very necessary way forward. Today, the House of Representatives is beginning the process of moving that legislation through the chamber. When this bill arrives in the Senate, it is my plan to bring it to the floor as quickly as possible for consideration. Senators must be prepared to act with urgency to send a final product to the President's desk before the June 5th deadline. I commend President Biden and his team for producing a sensible compromise under the most difficult of circumstances. The bipartisan agreement accomplishes two major goals. First and foremost, it takes default off the table, sparing Americans from immense economic pain. And second, it protects key investments that are essential for our growing economy, for fixing our infrastructure, for making the U.S. more competitive on the world stage. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid will not be touched. Our veterans will be cared for. And again, we are avoiding the single worst outcome possible, a default on the national debt.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Republican, also plans to vote yes. He put out a statement Sunday night. The Senate must act swiftly and pass this agreement without unnecessary delay. TheHill.com writes that appeared directed at Senate conservatives who are thinking about slowing down the bill with procedural delays. Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, has said publicly he plans to use every procedural tool available to him. He was interviewed on the Benny Johnson podcast today.
I really like the way this thing started out, Benny. The Limit, Save, Grow bill that was passed by the House a month or so ago was fantastic. It wasn't perfect, but it represented a very good faith effort to deal with the problem. And it's something that I could have supported. Now, while I knew that, sure, negotiations happen and it might not turn out exactly like the Limit, Save, Grow Act, I would have expected once the House all aligned on this, all but a handful of members voted for it, and it wasn't easy to get them to do it. I would have expected the final product negotiated by the Speaker to bear a closer resemblance to Limit, Save, Grow than what this bill has. And despite lofty intentions and what may have been the best of intentions by Speaker McCarthy going into this, I think he might genuinely believe that most of the most significant reforms achieved by Limit, Save, Grow are still achieved by this bill. They're just not. When you read the text, when you read the fine print, as I have this nasty habit of doing, in almost no area does this even come close to doing what Limit, Save, Grow does. And in some cases, the promised reforms that are still being promised to this day that are in this bill, they're completely illusory. It doesn't do what they claim that it does. So I want to make sure that Republicans understand, number one, there's no reason why we should be forced to act on this so hastily that we're not able to review the text and fully understand what it does before passing this. Number two, that if in fact some of these provisions are illusory in terms of the reforms they offer, we ought to be able to fix those and not be bound by this agreement that the Speaker reached with the White House. We weren't in those. We weren't part of those. We shouldn't be bound by those. Number three, it's also important to remember that this shot clock that we think we're dealing with is itself largely illusory. There's no reason. Look, we've got quarterly tax payments coming in on June 15th. There's no reason why we couldn't maintain currency on everything we're doing with our existing payments on interest and principal on the debt as they become due. No reason we couldn't make it at least to June 15th. We can make it to June 15th. That buys us another month or so of enough revenue to do what we need to do with the government. I don't think we ought to wait until mid to late July to get this done, but I think we could get to mid to late July if we can just make it to June 15th.
Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, on the Benny Johnson podcast today. Former Vice President Mike Pence, who is expected to launch a presidential campaign in the coming weeks, says he is opposed to this debt ceiling and budget deal. His political advocacy group putting out a statement saying Congress's debt limit deal doesn't just kick the can down the road, it uses Washington's smoke and mirror games to make small reforms while weakening our military at a time of increasing threats from foreign adversaries. Mark Zandi, Moody's Analytics chief economist, has warned that if the U.S. were to default on its debt, everyone is going to get hurt. It's just a matter of degree. Today, he was interviewed by Washington Post senior writer Francis Stead Sellers, saying the agreement negotiated by the White House and House Speaker is not perfect, but it gets the job done to avoid the worst.
I look at this obviously from the prism of what does it mean for the economy, the broader economy, and I'll have to say it's about as good as it gets. I mean, given all the various scenarios that could have played out here, I do think this is a reasonably good ending to the story. Hopefully it is the ending and they get this across the finish line in the next few days and pass a piece of legislation that the president can sign. If you kind of add up the totality of all the moving parts here, by my estimate, it'll shave as much as 150,000 jobs from the economy by the end of 2024. That's when the peak of the impact will be felt. Now, that's not great. I mean, the economy is struggling. Recession risks are high. If I were king, this isn't what I would do. But 150K in the grand scheme of things is manageable. Just to provide a little bit of context, the economy currently is providing about 250,000 jobs per month. So 150K is a little over half the job creation in a typical month. It'll add about 0.1% to the unemployment rate. Fortunately, the unemployment rate's very low at 3.4%, shave a bit off of GDP. So, in the grand scheme of things, not great. This isn't what I would do, but it's manageable.
It's manageable, but we're not, as you said, quite off the hook yet, including a meeting this afternoon. Tell us a little bit more about whether you expect this to pass and what the implications would be for the U.S. and for the rest of the world if it did not.
Well, at this point, Francis, I'd be shocked if it didn't. Got a lot of folks with their reputations on the line. You got the Speaker of the House, you've got the President of the United States that come together. It's not going to be an easy vote. It's clear that folks on the right wing of the Republican Party are not happy with this. They'd like to see much greater cuts to the budget. And the folks on the left of the Democratic Party, they're not so happy with this. They're not very comfortable with the cuts and some of the other aspects of the plan, like the more restrictive work requirements on SNAP, the food stamp program. But I do think there's enough votes in the middle of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party to come together and get this done. It's not going to be very graceful, I suspect, over the next few days, and it may feel at points that lawmakers may not be able to get across the finish line by that June 5th deadline that you mentioned at the start of the conversation. But, I think the odds are very high if they do. If they don't, if I'm wrong, well, that'll be just a complete, utter mess. There's lots of scenarios at that point. None of them are any good. They're all just different flavors of darkness, So that's the reason why I think at the end of the day, lawmakers will come to terms and pass this legislation.
Mark Zandi, Moody's Analytics chief economist, in a Washington Post interview. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 50, S&P up a fraction, NASDAQ up 41. The headline at CNBC, Dow finishes Tuesday lower as Wall Street weighs odds of debt ceiling deal clearing Congress. Transportation Security Administration says it screened 9.8 million people at airports over the 4-day Memorial Day holiday weekend, and that's more than 300,000 than Memorial Day weekend in 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Story from the New York Post. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said Tuesday he will lead an effort to hold FBI Director Christopher Wray in contempt of Congress if he refuses to share an informant file accusing President Biden of being part of a $5 million bribery scheme while he was vice president. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, gave FBI Director Wray until Tuesday to comply with a subpoena for the tip-off, warning that his continued refusal would begin the contempt process. That was from the New York Post. Speaker McCarthy said this today on Fox News.
Comer subpoenaed the document that he's requested. We have jurisdiction over the FBI, which they seem to act like we do not. I personally called Director Wray and told him he needs to send that document. Today is the deadline. So let me not just tell you, let me tell Director Christopher Wray right here, right now. If he misses the deadline today, I am prepared to move contempt charges in Congress against him. We have jurisdiction over this. He can send us that document. We have the right to look at that, Republicans and Democrats alike in that committee. And if he does not follow through with the law, we will move contempt charges against Christopher Wray and the FBI.
You know what he says,
they are
Mr.
not
Speaker?
above the law.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Fox News. Washington Examiner article has this: a GOP chairman will revisit holding Secretary of State Antony Blinken in contempt of Congress if he refuses to let the full House Foreign Affairs Committee view a key Afghan descent cable. The cable is known to have criticized the State Department's planning for the Afghanistan evacuation. Now to the war in Ukraine. This from AP. A rare drone attack jolted Moscow early Tuesday, causing only light damage, but forcing evacuations as residential buildings were struck in the Russian capital for the first time in the war against Ukraine. The Kremlin, meanwhile, pursued its relentless bombardment of Kyiv with a third assault on the city in 24 hours. Reaction from White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
Thank you. President Biden was asked yesterday about long-range missiles for Ukraine ATACMS, and he said it's still in play. In the past, the U.S. would say no. So what's changed from no to it's still in play, and what needs to happen for the U.S. to provide Ukraine with long-range missiles? And also I would like to follow up Zeke's question. I would like to clarify, you don't support Ukraine's attacks on Russian territory at all, or attacks with U.S. equipment?
So look, I don't have anything any changes to the policy to announce from here as it relates to long-range long-range missiles. Look, as it relates to the drone attacks that we saw in Moscow, we've been very clear. We're going to gather information and see exactly what happened. So just want to be very clear about that. But look, we do not support attacks inside of Russia. That's it, period. I mean, I cannot be any more clear than what I just stated. We do not support attacks inside of Russia, period. We've been very clear about that. That's been a general matter that you have heard from us over and over again this past several months, and I cannot be more clearer than that.
Why President said it's still in play when asked about long range?
What I can tell you right now is I don't have any changes to our policy to share with you at this time.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Russia's war on Ukraine was one of the topics that Vice President Kamala Harris mentioned when she gave the commencement address at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, New York, on Saturday.
Cadets, since our day, your first day on campus, the world has drastically changed. A once-in-a-century global pandemic took millions of lives. and disrupted life for billions more. America ended our longest war, and Russia launched the first major ground war in Europe since World War II. Looking forward to the future, it is clear you graduate into an increasingly unsettled world where long-standing principles are at risk. In Ukraine, Russia's aggression is an attack on the lives and freedom of the Ukrainian people, and an attack on international rules and norms that have served as the foundation of international security and prosperity for generations. In the Indo-Pacific, China is rapidly modernizing its military and threatening both the freedom of the seas and rules of international commerce. At the same time, autocrats have become bolder, the threat of terrorism persists, and an accelerating climate crisis continues to disrupt lives and livelihoods, all a threat to global stability and security. And here's how I see it. In the face of all these challenges, America plays a singular role of leadership. Cadets, global security and global prosperity depend on the leadership of the United States of America. And a strong America remains indispensable to the world. Our democratic ideals of freedom and liberty inspire billions. Our vibrant economy creates unmatched innovation and opportunity and drives global growth. Our unrivaled network of allies and partners allows us to build coalitions and catalyze global action in a way no other nation can. And our military is the strongest in the world. Our military is a force that underwrites global stability and our national security. And it is this pillar of our strength where you cadets have dedicated yourself to lead. Essential to our strength is the role then that you will play in defending our nation's highest ideals.
Vice President Kamala Harris at West Point on Saturday. She's the first woman to give the commencement address at the U.S. Military Academy. And she also told the cadets this year you celebrate the 75th anniversary of the integration of women in the military, as well as the desegregation of our military. These milestones are a reminder of a fundamental truth. Our military is strongest when it fully reflects the people of America. An Associated Press story from Beijing, China. Prospects for a renewed high-level military dialogue between China and the U.S. remain dim, with Beijing saying their defense chiefs will not hold a bilateral meeting, while both are attending a weekend security conference in Singapore. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning on Tuesday blamed the U.S., saying Washington should earnestly respect China's sovereignty and security interests and concerns, immediately correcting the wrongdoing, show sincerity, and create the necessary atmosphere and conditions for dialogue and communication between the two militaries. Back in Washington, the representative of Taiwan to the U.S., B. Kim Xiao, was interviewed by reporters at a Christian Science Monitor breakfast. Asked by the Washington bureau chief of CSM, Linda Feldman, about lessons that Taiwan is learning about a possible invasion by China by watching Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
There's been speculation about what Beijing has learned from the war in Ukraine. So what has Taiwan learned from the war? And are you reassured by the American and more broadly Western response?
Well, I think we are all trying to take lessons from the unfortunate tragedies of Ukraine so that those tragedies will not be repeated anywhere else, especially in Taiwan. So our first and foremost priority is to take lessons that will help to fortify our continuing existence as a free and open democracy, free of coercion. Our best hope is that Beijing also takes the lesson that aggression will not succeed, that there will be tremendous international pushback against aggression. In Taiwan, we are learning from the resilience of the Ukrainian people in their will to defend, in their determination to defend their homeland. On an operational and tactical level, we are also learning about the use of some asymmetric modern systems that have supported their defenses and pushback against the invasion and against aggression.
What do you mean by that? What asymmetric measures are you talking about?
Well, ultimately, we are smaller democracies confronting some of the most powerful global militaries. And from Taiwan's perspective, in our own self-defense, we do not intend to engage in an arms race, and neither are we in a capacity to do so. And so we strongly believe that we must invest in asymmetric capabilities. And those are smaller, cost-effective, highly mobile, survivable systems that will target an invading force that will be strong enough to also deter, ultimately, any possibility of an invasion.
B. Kim Xiao, Taiwan's representative to the U.S., at a breakfast with reporters hosted by the Christian Science Monitor in Washington, D.C. A few more headlines. The White House says President Biden will be hosting United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for an official visit on June 8th. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis beginning his first presidential campaign swing through early caucus and primary states, beginning with Iowa, then heading to New Hampshire and South Carolina. And former First Lady Rosalynn Carter has dementia, her family announced today. She is 95 years old. She is at home in Georgia with former President Jimmy Carter, who has been at home receiving hospice care since early this year. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.